Hi, folks. My name is Steph Roy McCallum, and I want to talk to you about a topic that I find is coming up again and again and again in my trainings and my facilitations and my conversations with organizations and with leaders. It's the topic of stigma and what to do about it. And I really think that if you work in public engagement or facilitation or internal engagement inside your organization, you are probably coming across this. And as the world gets more polarized and the divide between groups of people gets bigger, it's more and more at play. So I want to start first by asking, what is stigma, so that we're all clear on what it is and we have a shared agreement. The dictionary says it is a set of negative and often unfair beliefs that a society or a group of people have about something. So that can be a set of beliefs that they hold about folks who experience mental health challenges, those who are unhoused, people who are living with addiction, people who are experiencing poverty. Those set of beliefs can be applied to racialized or ethnic communities, to those who practice particular religions, to those with certain physical abilities, based on gender or ideology. So think about things like politics and how stigma comes into play. Now, I think that it's prevalent everywhere in society right now, especially as we live in a time of outrage, of heightened conflict and intensity, and people's emotional reactions to things. But stigma can be individual, like based on a particular person, or that person can internalize the stigma based on how they see themselves because of how they have been treated and the behaviors and attitudes that impact them, which is horrific, I think, because if our goal in community engagement is to make sure that people feel valued and worthy and like they matter and to create a sense of belonging and inclusion, well, then when stigma is at play, none of those things are possible. That I think that stigma can result in perceived judgment and attitudes towards others. So, how people are treated, what is said to them or what is said about them, that perpetuates the space, and how people are really impacted by the conversation. Neighbors about neighbors or members of certain communities. I think stigma can be enacted like in our bylaws, in our policies, in the ways we actually operate when we work with each other. So we can make up a story about an individual and then perpetuate how we treat them or treat a group of people when they come to present or when they come to participate. It can also, of course, be structural. So legislated and enshrined in our laws and in our regulations, how we treat certain groups of people. And we, of course, there's a long history of that, especially in colonized places when it comes to systemic oppression. And that's sort of like a codifying of stigma. And I want to show you some slides I've used a couple of times in workshops recently, and I think they're kind of helpful to understand. So, what do we do about this? So, this first set of points on this slide are are brought to you by the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And they talk about the impact of stigma. So that stigma seriously affects the well-being of those who experience it, right? Their mental health is lower, their sense of self-worth and self-esteem is lower, their opportunities are lower as a result. Stigma affects people while they are experiencing the problem. So it's like a pile-on effect. So you already have challenges, whatever those challenges might be unhoused or living with mental health challenges or addictions, experiencing poverty. And then while you are attempting to address your challenges, there the stigma piles on and compounds your belief about yourself. And then stigma profoundly changes how people feel about themselves and the way others see them. So it's not just how you feel about yourself, it's actually how others see you as a result. And I just think that's horrific because actually we are in this together. When we live in our communities, we're in this together. When we are work in our organizations, we're in this together. When we create a sense of divide because of the judgment and the unfair treatment that happens to certain groups of people or that becomes enshrined in our policies and our procedures, then we're all a little less as a result. So there are some tips out there on what you can do to reduce stigma. This is also a source from the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and they've outlined 7 things you can do to reduce stigma. And I want to point out that one of the things we see over and over again when we see these lists is that the very first thing is education. For sure, absolutely, to educate yourself, but also educate other people. Like we can educate people out of the stigma that they hold. And I'm not sure about that, actually. You need to be aware of your own attitudes and behavior. Choose your words carefully, right? When we label people as being something, then it's almost like that becomes the entirety of their identity. When we say someone is homeless, that becomes who they are, rather than we say they are unhoused, which becomes a small portion of the challenge that they are experiencing right now. It's not their full identity. You know, they are also someone's parent or sibling or child, and or friend. And they have values and beliefs of their own, and housed is one small piece of it. So these are really common tips to reduce stigma, but I went looking for some research on how effective are they actually. And there's been a couple of fantastic studies done recently that showcase that education is not that effective. And so I think that's really, really incredible. And it's aligned with my experience in public engagement that when you tell people that they should think differently about something, it very rarely changes their mind. So I think it comes to a different kind of question, what actually helps people change their mind? So here's what some of the research showed is that there is limited effectiveness in education campaigns in reducing public stigma. So the actual attitudes and beliefs held by groups of people or a society as a whole about certain groups of people. But it does have an impact on self-stigma, how people feel about themselves. So that's important. Education should be maintained. But when we think about our work in the public arena, that isn't going to shift the views of people. That's not going to close the divide. So what does work? Well, contact. So building connection, deepening understanding in combination with education and personal resonance. So actually people, if we want to say that in really plain language, people meeting people getting to know people, contact with peers, networks, and connections about their experience with the other. Now, calls to action, right? So of folks who are fighting on behalf of those who are experiencing stigma, so protesting against behaviors or policies or attitudes, can impact people who are neutral, who don't really have a view yet, or who are uncertain about where they stand on a particular judgment or assumption about a group. But it actually can create resistance for folks who are pretty clear about their own opinion. It doesn't shift them, it actually digs them in. And then dialogue, conversation, learning, and connection make a significant impact. Well, that's our work in the public arena. That's our work in community engagement. So let me be as clear and simple as I can be. People change their minds through a combination of conversation and experience. Talking together, which deepens our understanding, and personal experience, which means you have resonance, you have relationship, trust is built, and you have something to hook a new belief to create a new neural pathway in your brain. That's how people change their minds. That's our work. That's the opportunity for our work as well in spaces where that divide is really far apart. And to put it more simply, when we think about it in terms of a leadership competency, to combat stigma, which I think is a responsibility of those of us who are designing and implementing engagement processes and conversations, we need to see conflict as an opportunity. We need to see that divide, those holding of views as an opportunity to build understanding, create relationship, and shift the conversation. And to do that, we've got to step into the leadership of those processes with courage, because they're messy, difficult, challenging conversations, and also the commitment to hold the space for these difficult conversations so we can create conversations that shift hearts and minds. That's a couple of thoughts about stigma. I love to hear what you think. If you want access to the actual research articles, I'm happy to send you links. Shoot me an email, Stephani@bravelylead.com. Thanks so much for listening.